Hi, I'm Ed Bacon, the rector of All Saints Church, Pasadena. Whoever you are and wherever you find yourself on the journey of faith, I hope that you'll find something here that speaks to you. Welcome. One of the great things about All Saints Church is that our alumni, staff alumni, come back, and they care so much about All Saints Church that they bring resources to us. And this morning is a brilliant example of that, in that Scott Richardson, who was my associate rector long ago, 10 years ago, one of the great chapters of our life here at All Saints, is here. And he's brought one of his parishioners, and he introduced us to Tom and said it would really be great if All Saints Church and Tom could get to know one another. And today is our introductory meeting. He's gonna teach us. We're gonna ask him questions. We're gonna stay in touch because simply put, All Saints is not doing what it could about climate crisis. And we want to make sure that we have a foundation of understanding and that we are connected with a network throughout California and the country and the world to do what we can to reverse this crisis. So I would love to say a bunch of things about Tom, but I really want Scott to do it. And I know that those of you who've known Scott Richardson and who've been here for 15 years or more, know and love him. So I would simply like for you to warmly welcome to this podium our friend Scott Richardson.
Before I introduce Tom, let me just say that it is a delight to be back. You never know how deep it is until you get here, but I've been looking forward to it. It's been 10 years since I left, and it was just a great joy to be in the worshiping congregation today, and Ed, to hear you preach about compassion, which is another way of talking about Tom's topic today. Tom Steyer is a member of Grace Cathedral, but sometime member of St. Mary the Virgin, which is my little church up in San Francisco. I always like to tell Tom that every Episcopalian can have two homes. You get your parish and your cathedral. That's a beautiful thing. Tom is, not to put too fine a point on it, an immensely wealthy human being. And he has signed Warren Buffett's pledge to give away half of his wealth in his lifetime. For the good of the world. He and his wife, Kat Taylor, do amazing things up in the Bay Area. They have a bank in Oakland where they're making capital available to communities that wouldn't necessarily be able to access capital. Kat is the CEO. Tom told me last night the best the bank has ever had. They have a ranch and farm in Pescadero where they're growing food, and they have a particular concern to offer healthy food to children in public education. But Tom is here because he wants to talk about climate change, not only to you, but to as many people as possible, to listen to the urgency in that. So he stepped down as the founder of Farallon Capital last year and has devoted himself entirely to doing something about climate change. And so we are linked up in that. That's one of the core values of St. Mary the Virgin, the church where I serve. So it's been a delight to be on this journey with Tom, not only wringing our hands over it and talking about it, but thinking quite specifically about those things that we can do. So Tom is going to speak. I hope we'll have a lot of time for Q&A afterwards. But I want to introduce my good friend and now this global climate warrior, Tom Steyer.
I am very intimidated to follow that introduction, let me say. And I will try and be brief because I would love to answer questions, and that might be the best way to get out the information that I've learned on this topic over the last few years. But I'll give you a slightly more detailed, if slightly less complimentary version of who I am than Scott gave you, which is basically I was an investor for 30 years. I ran a fund. I went to Stanford Business School. I invested mostly for endowments and foundations. We invested all over the world. I found it, very intellectually stimulating. It was a huge puzzle after huge puzzle, and then managing people and learning about the world. And during that time, sometime around 10 years ago, since I can read, I started to become aware of the threat of climate change, of what was happening to the world. And so I continued to do my job, and it was kind of a 6 a.m. to 6 p.m. job. But I started also to devote my non-work hours to energy and climate. And that entailed basically giving money to universities so they could do research. I'm on the board at Stanford. I love Stanford University. And I thought they could maybe do the job that they've done in information technology for energy, so that they could, with all their resources, policy, engineering, pure science, that they could really lead the way. And I did the same thing to a lesser extent at Yale University. And my wife did it at Harvard. So we really were just using the existing strong institutions of the United States of America to try and work on the problem. And in 2010, there was a campaign by a couple of out-of-state companies to roll back California's energy legislation. And believe it or not, as Californians, you should know, California has the most progressive energy laws of any major government in the whole world. We really do. We have done everything. The people who have worked on it have been heroic. We love to hate our legislature, but in fact, there are people in that legislature who have worked tirelessly and incredibly effectively to basically put us at the forefront of a new way of thinking about energy. We use half as much energy per capita as the rest of the United States of America. We actually have genuinely led the way on this, and I particularly hope that there will be other states that join us as we go forward. And I want to talk a little more about this, but I think the ability for California to lead on this is huge. But in 2010, there was this attempt to roll back our state laws, and no one really wanted to take on the oil companies because the previous person, who is, I believe, a gentleman from Los Angeles, California, had spent about $73 million and gotten creamed. So people thought it would be a dumb thing to do. And actually, I got to join up. Since it was dumb and no one else wanted to do it, seemed like the perfect job. And I joined up with a great guy, who, by the way, is an Episcopalian, named George Schultz, who's a Republican. He's 92 years old. He was in 3 Republican administrations. And we co-chaired the No on 23 campaign, which is the first time I got involved politically. And I learned a lot about California, and I learned a lot about what people care about in California as it relates to energy and climate. And I'll take a break here and just tell you what they care about. They only care about 3 things. They care about jobs as it relates to energy. They care about health as it relates to energy. And they care about being taken advantage of by companies. And when you get away from those 3 things, they actually don't care. They don't care about global climate change. They don't care about CO2. They don't care about 11th grade science class. They really care about the things that affect them and their families, that they can viscerally feel in their hearts. And as a result, we got more votes in 2010. We were very disciplined about the way we spoke about it. We got more votes in 2010 than any proposition or any person running for office in the United States. It's a big state. To be fair, we are the largest state, so that's a little... But the other thing that was true is the coalition on No on 23 was not only Republican and Democrat, but it was also, we had very strong labor support. I think we basically fought them to a draw in terms of business. And we had great support in the different ethnic communities in the state. So I always like people to be reminded that when you look at the polls and you look at the voting on any energy or climate bill, it doesn't work out the way that the stereotypes would have you think. Basically, the people who support environmentalism by far the strongest are Latinos. The number 2 group is Asian Americans, and the number 3 group is African Americans. So if your vision of what an environmentalist looks like is a middle-aged white person driving a Volvo or a Prius. That is actually not who comes out and votes on these things. And I've looked really closely county by county. It actually is the exact opposite of what you think. The next job that no one wanted, so therefore perfect for me, was to get rid of a tax loophole, which George Schultz and I co-chaired along with a state senator from Los Angeles named Kevin DeLeon. And it was basically close a loophole which was about $1 billion a year for the state, and use half the money to retrofit the schools on an energy basis for 5 years. And then it all goes to the general fund. And once again, it was a situation where we thought we'd have strong corporate opposition and that we would be in a fight with companies who were basically getting a big tax break. Out-of-state companies, for some bizarre reason, didn't pay the same tax rates as California companies in California. And we couldn't roll that back in the legislature for a variety of reasons. So we put it on the ballot, and it was the only thing that was different from 2010 in terms of coalition and message was that we had to convince the companies, which were some of the largest companies in the United States, that it wasn't in their interest to save $1 billion a year. And believe it or not, we convinced them of that. Yeah. In one of the funniest things, the guy who was running this campaign, we put an ad and asked these companies to sign the California Tax Fairness Pledge, which I thought was one of the hokiest things I'd ever heard. Sign it by high noon on Friday or we're coming after you. And I was like, you're kidding. They all signed it. So life is funny. Anyway, at the end of last year, which was at the end of 2012, I actually quit my job as an investor, which I'd done for a long time. And basically because I felt as if this was our big generational challenge. I'm 55 years old. If I'm not going to do it now, then I'm never going to do it. And I felt there was something missing. Not that I'm so talented or special, but for some reason we weren't doing well in terms of energy and climate as a country or as a globe. And I thought that, that meant that people had to pitch in, including me. So I will talk to you about how we're doing that. But before I do, I'd like to address for 1 second why we're in church at 10:15 on a Sunday morning, 800 miles from home, and how that's informed this decision. Because my midlife crisis, believe it or not, so maybe 15 years ago, was belief in God. So whereas I think I should have been driving a convertible and finding some new associates to hang out with, actually, I ended up believing in God. And I called my mother in New York and I said, I know this is going to surprise you, but it turns out I believe in God. And she said, listen, Sonny, there are an awful lot of people who are much smarter than you that have believed in God. Don't sound so smug. So I'll try not to. But it turns out that that's a profound thing in people's lives, and I was hoping it would just stay a small thing, but it's, in fact, if you come to church at All Saints every Sunday and use it to think about the rest of your life and organize the way that you feel about things, the way that you understand things, the things that you care about, it changes your decisions. And it's radically changed my decisions, and often in ways that I have not expected. As Scott Richardson and I were discussing last night, one of my favorite ways of thinking about this issue is stealing from a famous American. The concern is not whether God is on our side in this fight. The concern is whether we're on God's side. And in this case, what does that exactly mean, and how does belief inform the way that the way that I go about this? I think there are a lot of statistics here. And by and large, they're informative, but they aren't the things that motivate people to make extreme decisions or to take action. As was said this morning in church, that's more about passion, it's about emotion. So here's some of the statistics that are true. That we have 1,000 times the rate of species extinction as normal. That we, You know, people spend a lot of time talking about 2 degrees centigrade, which I absolutely love, since no one in America thinks in centigrade. It's just the perfect way for scientists to prove that they are not the right people to talk about this to the American public, because they don't even use the right language, and then they use a really small number. 350 parts per million, which, if you know Bill McKibben, who I think is a really great guy, no one knows what 350 means. It's 350.org, which is great, and he does a fantastic job. But I would say 1% of Americans do not know what 350 parts per million means. They count the number of extreme weather events, and just for your information, we produce 31 gigatons of CO2 a year as a globe. No one knows what a gigaton is. So from the point of view of this, having scientists explain what it means, particularly given that they wouldn't give you 100% on the sun rising tomorrow, I think is really not, from a political standpoint, you couldn't do worse. So the question is, what really motivates people? And what motivates people is what they love. People act for what they love. People act to protect what they love. And in this case, you have to ask yourself if you actually believe in God, if you believe in the positive life force in the world and trying to connect yourself to it. You have to be specific about how that is evidenced for you. So I'll give you an example of climate change and what it's going to mean, and one which you have to admit from an objective standpoint is overwhelmingly powerful, but might not be the one that gets you up in the morning. And that is something called the wall of death. I'm not sure how many of you guys are aware of this, but there is a wall that has been raised between India and Bangladesh. And they have a border of about 2,000 miles. And obviously, Bangladesh, for most of the people in this room who remember the concert for Bangladesh, is a really, really poor country. And it has, I think, 140 million people in it. So it's an extremely populous, really poor country. And it happens to be an extremely populous, really poor country that is Muslim. And India is obviously a huge country that has a big religious divide in it, and the last thing that they want is 140 million impoverished Muslims to come into their country. So when you read about climate change, one of the things that you always read about is that the seas will rise. And the reason the seas will rise is not because the ice in the Arctic Ocean will melt, even though that is happening at a much faster rate than people expect. But if you think about the ice in the Arctic Ocean, just remember, it's like the ice in your drink. It can melt, but it doesn't mean your drink will go over on the floor. The only thing that raises the ocean is when the ice on land melts and goes into the ocean. And so what we're really talking about in the first place is Greenland melting, and the ice on Greenland sliding into the ocean and melting. And the place that people always talk about being inundated in the most substantial way in the most populous places is Bangladesh, which is why they have the wall of death that's 2,000 miles. And the people who are the Indian troops that are guarding this wall to prevent immigration have orders to shoot to kill. And in fact, they've killed about 10,000 people so far. So when you think about climate change, the effects, we're talking about enormous numbers of people with an idea that is really, to me, extremely shocking, but it isn't necessarily. I don't know many people in Bangladesh. I've been to India probably 10 times, but I've never been to Bangladesh. And so it's a story that freaks me out, but it isn't one where I understand in my heart exactly what that means. So this is a global problem. We need global solutions, but I think people need to understand it on a local basis. The things that you love are particular. We are actually sitting here in a church that stems from a tradition from one small hill tribe in the Middle East. We're an Anglican church. We're very specific. The way that we tap into that spiritual force in the universe is very specific, with lots of traditions that mean a lot to us. That is our way of expressing that feeling, of expressing that, being part of that global tribe. I mean, one of the things that I really enjoyed in the sermon this morning was an awareness that other peoples are trying to tap into that same power from different places, and that we are, in effect, trying to get to the same place in different ways. So the question is, what are the specific things that move you, that let you understand we are risking in the world by this change? So I will give you one for me, which is semi-amusing since it's my 21-year-old daughter, one of whose best friends is actually sitting right over there. So, who lives in Pasadena. So my daughter is just finished her sophomore year in college, and she is working in Montana this summer. And I think she's actually tracking grizzlies, although I don't exactly know what tracking grizzlies means. Someone asked me, what if she catches one? It's like, oh, let's hope she's a very inefficient tracker of grizzlies. But 3 of her 8 great-grandparents were from Montana or moved there because they thought it was so much fun. And she has been calling me all the time and saying, you have no idea how fun this really is. And will you send me the fly fishing equipment that's been untouched in the attic for the last 20 years that someone gave her in hopes that one day she would, really like fly fishing? And, that is the specifics of 4 generations of a family liking the same thing and her thinking she just discovered the wilds of Montana. She just discovered the rivers of Montana, and the idea that being there is something that's of inestimable value is something that's the specific for me that would mean being worth almost anything. So when we talk about what will get people motivated on this, I think young people in this world understand that it is very directly going to affect their lives. And I think that a lot of the people in this room looking around who are around my age think that maybe it won't affect their lives, that maybe we will escape having completely passed on the biggest challenge of our generation, and that we will not be called to account in a personal way, which I think is actually scientifically going to turn out to be wrong, that there's much more urgency about this problem, that time is much shorter than Americans are aware of. And that is one of the things that I am intent on trying to make people aware of, is that actually, not only do I think this is the generational challenge, that this is the issue by which we will all be measured in terms of, did you in fact do anything on the major moral challenge of the day? I also think we will practically have to deal with the impact of it in a very real way. I mean, I'm originally from the middle of New York, and I was talking to a New Yorker during Superstorm Sandy last year. And New Yorkers, and I can say this with a lot of knowledge and love, are not that close to the out-of-doors. And I was talking to this guy, and I said, are you worried about this? He goes, absolutely not. And I said, well, it looks like stuff is really happening, and houses are being blown away, and you're really not worried. He goes, Tom, I live on the 17th floor. I have a refrigerator full of food. I can't believe the water's getting to the 17th floor, and I can stay for weeks here, just camped out until, we get it back under control. And I was thinking there the whole time, like, how do you think the elevator gets to the 17th floor? It was amazing. And also, if the electricity goes out, what do you think happens to your food? So I do think that if you have no connection with other people in the world and no connection with the physical parts of Earth, that this can be a stretch. I really do, because I don't think statistics are what get people to quit their jobs. And I don't think that statistics are the things that, cause your heart to break. So in the way that I honestly, what was in the sermon this morning was really what it's going to take, and that really is politically what we've been saying is, you can only talk to people if you want them to do something about things they really care about. And if you can't do that, if you can't translate a scientific problem into human words, human emotions, then you will lose, because you will not get people's attention. They will not care. We are in a democracy, and I could give you a long explanation of why I think this is true. We're in a democracy where social change has happened for the last 225 years by people going to the ballot box and acting. And this is an issue where the politics have been handled unbelievably poorly. And it's something where we went through the last 5 months and tried to map the different organizations that are involved in this scientifically, from a policy standpoint, and from a political standpoint. And one of the issues is people conflate policy and politics, and they're completely different. And we actually have a set of institutions here on policy that are fantastic. They can tell you exactly what we need to do. We have solved this problem, which is about widespread, economically profitable pollution, several times before in the last 30 years. We've actually done it mostly under Republican administrations. And when we change the rules, American business solves this faster than you can believe, more creatively than you can believe, and cheaper than you believe. So every time people tell you this can't be done, the answer is, we've already done it 3 times. If we change the rules, if we can win politically, you will be shocked at how well we do this, how cheaply we do this, and how proud we are of ourselves for handling what will turn out to be our biggest challenge. That is, my real feeling about this is our chance as a generation to prove that actually we aren't the generation to whom everything was given and nothing returned. And I honestly think that is where we are, that we stand a reasonable chance of being that generation. I happen to be completely optimistic that that will not turn out to be true, but it will not turn out to be true only if people decide that this is something they're willing to get out of bed to do, and to, do all the jobs that no one wants to do and make a complete ass of themselves, which is what I've been doing for the last few months.
So Tom and I have been on this journey a little bit, and one of the things that he is working towards right now is direct political involvement. We don't like the way the rules are written in terms of the way money can influence politics, but those are the current rules right now. And Tom has a commitment to using some of his wealth, not just to pursue these things, but to win. We're at a place of calling the question right now, and that these are political battles that lead to good policy, one hopes, but winning is key. And so, Tom, just as a first question, I'm wondering if you could speak to what is immediately in front of you in terms of not just political engagement, but being willing to battle.
Well, one of the things that's going to turn out to be true here is that in order to have an impact, we're going to have to make people very uncomfortable, and they're going to be annoyed. And we have to look at their annoyance as a sign of victory and not be too abashed by it, which is a little difficult to do, if you're an Episcopalian, I guess. But we actually have felt that the only way that we will have impact on this long run is by threatening the jobs of existing office holders. And I know that sounds harsh, and it does to me too, but it seems as if the only thing that motivates behavior for elected officials is a fear of their own job loss. And if they don't fear that, they won't react. And they'll be very polite, and they will listen, and they may agree with your argument that this is an enormous threat to the entire world, but they will not change their vote. And that is an amazing fact, but it seems like an overwhelmingly true fact. And so what we've done is to try and figure out where we can make a point that you have to be on the right side of this issue. So I quit my job at the end of last year. 13 is an off year. The first thing we did was get involved in Massachusetts in the primary between 2 Democrats. One guy who's very strong on energy and climate. The bill in 2010 was actually the Waxman-Markey bill. Ed Markey was running to replace John Kerry in the Senate. His opponent had been in favor of the Keystone Pipeline, in favor of subsidies for oil companies, against wind and solar. So we basically tried to empower existing Massachusetts citizens to go door to door and to go on the web to basically push Markey and attack Steve Lynch. And we worked a lot and incredibly successfully through the faith community. We contacted 3 million people in Massachusetts through churches, synagogues, and we actually got amazing response. We worked a lot through students, but basically we wanted to make the point that really opposing clean energy as a Democrat is not acceptable. And you know, we got a fair bit of pushback that why were we involved? What right did we have to do that? But you know, I think that's what I said. If you're going to have an impact, you're going to make some people annoyed and upset and feel you're acting inappropriately, and you have to just, that comes with the territory. I think we're going to, there's a race right now in Virginia between a guy who sued, as the Attorney General in Virginia, he sued the University of Virginia for the money back to the state that they had spent teaching climate science. I mean, it's amazing. The guy is running for governor. So, you know, and I'll give you an example. In this case, and you know, in order to do this, you have to professionally figure out what is the language that people can hear on this. And so everybody in my office is sitting here. We have to go after this guy as an anti-science person. You know, we're going to brand him as an anti-science person. And believe me, branding someone as an anti-science person is not really bad for them. It turns out everyone in my office is like, this is terrific. This is awesome. No, actually, Americans don't mind people who are anti-science. If, however, you can brand him as someone who is in the pocket of corrupt companies, if it's true, and we do have, I will say at the outset, we have a complete commitment only to saying things that are true. I mean, we're not going to fabricate, we're not going to distort, but we are going to choose which parts of the truth we emphasize. If you brand someone as in the pocket of a corrupt corporation, that Americans despise. That gets people's goats about as fast as anything. So we'll do that. We're spending a fair bit of time on Keystone. I could talk to you for longer about the Keystone Pipeline and why it's important, and why, in spite of all the betting in Washington, D.C., I think ultimately we will prevail. But that is one where if you go to Washington, I was in Washington last week, they all think they're going to approve the Keystone Pipeline. They all think it doesn't make any difference. You know, it's kind of, Tom, why don't you grow up and shut up? But no, we have a completely different opinion, and we're going to stay immature and not shut up. Yeah, I'll take another question.
Hi. I share your pain about scientists in a way because I work for NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory. And I'm responsible for translating what they say. But we're trying. And just a long-winded, maybe a bit of a plug, but also an invitation, is I'd love to have you come to the lab and see the work that we are doing. We're known from Mars, but actually our emphasis in the next 5 years is going to be on the Earth and understanding what's happening to it. So,
Awesome.
And there are a number of things that we're doing to get directly to the public, not necessarily through a scientist, even though we have some good ones, some of the changes that are happening. So that's a very warm invitation to you. My question really, though, has to do with a book called The Merchants of Doubt. And I'm wondering if you know about this book and the importance of this book to you and what you're trying to do.
Yes, I do.
And I just would be curious what you think about the historical process of the same people going so far back, and how do you counter that? If you may want to give everyone a context of what we're talking about.
Well, basically, there's a disinformation campaign on climate. And the disinformation campaign goes like this. We're just not sure if it's happening. There's some scientists who believe it, there's some scientists who don't believe it, but why would we jump to conclusions when the science is really under discussion and unknown? And to be fair, these are the same people who are not sure if cigarettes were addictive and cause cancer. Literally the same people. And it's about $200 million a year that they spend on fake research through fake foundations channeled into the popular press to basically make this point that it's under discussion, and that and you can read it. The Wall Street Journal. I've been a journal subscriber for over 30 years. Really, if you read the Wall Street Journal, you would be unsure. You would think it's pretty much of a hoax, and that the scientists who believe it are doing it because they want to get money for grants, which is amazing. The truth of the matter is 97% of people of scientists who've studied this believe that there is human-caused, climate change. 2.2% are not sure, and 0.4% think actually that they're wrong. I'm not a PhD in anything, and particularly in climate science, but so therefore I have to go with the idea that 97% are sure, and if they're right, we should be acting really strongly. And if the 0.4% turn out to be right, then God bless us all. I can go back to my day job and take it easy. So that's really, but there is an absolute cynical, I would think it should be honestly illegal, campaign through fake stuff to put stuff in the news media to make us all think that this is really a big, controversy.
Thanks for your leadership. And I've got about 10 questions to ask you, but I'll just stick with one. We know that the poor in the developing countries are the ones that are now being hardest hit by climate change and the impact. What role do you see for the developing world, third world countries, to be able to participate?
Well, thank you for that question. This is global pollution. This is a global problem. We're going to need a global solution, and the people who are going to pay the biggest price on this are the poorest people on the planet. As I like to say, if Tanzania has a climate disaster, there will not be $60 billion from the US government that went to repair the problems with Superstorm Sandy in Tanzania. In Tanzania, when it rains, you get wet. When it doesn't rain, you go hungry. There will not be the kind of money to save those people when the time comes. And in fact, if you look at who has emitted all the carbon dioxide in the world, the CO2 in the world, it's no one in Tanzania. The people who will pay the price here are the people who, in fact, have been unrelated to causing the problem. So when I think about how this is going to get solved, there's actually good news on this, by the way, if you read today's paper, which is US and China just came together for an agreement on hydrofluorocarbons, which basically, the way it was explained to me, and I called someone from the UN, from the IPCC, to try and get a measure, it's 91 gigatons. And that's another number that doesn't mean anything to you. But trust me, it's about 2 years worth of carbon emissions between now and 2050 if, in fact, this happens and the rest of the world signs on to it. It's a complicated thing, but it's being done through a mechanism called the Montreal Protocol that's worked really well in the past. And it's the way that we actually will lead. The U.S., people describe the U.S. as the essential country. If we don't lead, no one will lead. We can't lead by ourselves, but we're an essential part of any coalition of leadership. So if we're going to, in fact, deal with a global problem, we need our political leadership, we need our technological leadership, we need our ability to spend money, our financial leadership. And frankly, this is the task that the United States has had for at least, do the math, 70 years. And it's a task which we are suited for, capable of, and which we should be immensely grateful that we can do. So I feel as if the reason I'm fighting politically on this is I don't think we're a democratic country. We have to decide. 317 million Americans, we can't force Americans to take this on. Americans have to choose to take this on and to realize why it's in their interest to take it on and then do it and be proud of it. And that's why we're doing it this way, because we believe social change comes through democracy. That is what we believe in. So we're out there arguing why this matters to Americans in their homes and through their computers and knocking on doors, that is the way that we change. That is the only way for us to change, and that is the right way for us to change.
Yes, thank you for being here and for your work. As an engineer who, I don't know, have tried to explain my work to family members and others, I've often been surprised at how much communication is needed to be able to be clear to those who don't have the jargon, the science jargon. And so what I'm curious about is, have you seen, or whom in the Republican Party who is behind supporting science, technology, engineering, and math, or STEM education? Who in that community of Republicans would you feel to be the most persuasive advocate for your movement?
What a brutal question. Well, let me say this. I think there are many Republican office holders who understand this perfectly well. And I think that they are people of good faith who want the best for their constituents, for the country, and for the world. I really do. I think that it is very hard, given the makeup of the Republican Party right now, to run as a clean energy or climate change advocate. So that even the people who, like Lamar Alexander, who is really strong on this, really didn't vote for it in 2010. And the Republicans who I'm close to who work on this with me tend not to be elected officials. So George Shultz, at 92, George says exactly what he believes the truth to be. And one of the truths is he absolutely loves the Republican Party and is committed to it, but he doesn't need to get elected. So I think that what's happened is, and I'm a believer in a two-party system. The United States is going to have an effective two-party system. But right now, it is extremely hard to get through a primary in the Republican Party as a clean energy advocate. And let me say this. The New Jersey legislature gets elected in 2013, which may sound like a strange point, but we looked really hard to try and find clean energy or climate change advocates who were running in New Jersey as Republicans to support them, to say, they just had their whole coastline washed away. They don't need to wonder whether there's climate change. They have to wonder when they get their house back. So we thought this is the perfect opportunity for us to prove we are bipartisan, that we know we need both parties in this, that we have it in California, but in most of the country we don't. And so we looked, and honestly, the primary challengers in New Jersey, in the legislature, in the Republican Party, were all from the right. We couldn't find a single person who we could go out and support, which we were dying to do, just to make the point. And Governor Christie's pretty good on this, so he would be an example of a Republican who I think has embraced the need to act on this. But in the legislature, we couldn't find anyone.
Yeah, thank you for all you're doing, and you're a true humanitarian. So I completely concur with everything you said about the problems that we're facing. This is a dire emergency. We have to act quickly. But how can we scale this response for our entire economy? So one proposal is to implement a carbon tax. And I'd like to know where you stand on that. Do you support the idea of a nationwide carbon tax? Even China is behind a carbon tax, and they are beginning the initial implementation of a carbon tax there.
You're right. The Chinese, I think, the way it's been described to me, and I'm no expert, is that half of China will be under a cap-and-trade system by 2015. And they're... Okay, I'm talking about carbon tax. Yeah, I know. And one of the things is, look, I'm a humble MBA. I believe in markets, and I believe that markets, when they reflect all the information, work really, really well. The reason that we're discussing a carbon tax is if carbon is pollution, you need to pay for pollution. And then the market can make a decision based on the actual costs of producing whatever it is. I always like to say, I can do a really cheap garbage disposal if all I do with my garbage is dump it into Scott's yard. It's like, it's really cheap, and I can do your garbage disposal cheaply also, which is fantastic. and so the point is, how do you charge me for taking my garbage and dumping it into Scott's yard, which I would do anyway for the sheer pleasure of it, but it's a different question. So the question is carbon tax. How do you set the level so that you understand? Right now, what people want to do is, of my Republican friends who are for this, what they want is a revenue-neutral carbon tax. So that basically you tax carbon so that the market works and charges for the costs of your pollution, but then they want to return that money to the citizenry in one way, shape, or form, whether it's a dividend to people, whether it's a reduction in the corporate income tax. They want to get no new net dollars into the federal government. And so here's what I would say about all those things. I'm in favor of it if we can figure, period. I'll do anything I can. So I'm in favor of it, and I believe that returning it to the citizenry is a politically smart way to do it, and it's fine with me. The problem is getting the right level so that you get the production you want. The alternative is to say there's a rule, this is how much carbon we'll produce, and you guys buy the right to produce the carbon, and that's the market will then set the price. We'll set the amount, you set the price. The other way is we set the price, you set the amount. And in general, if you ask me in a perfect world as a humble MBA, I'd rather set the amount than the price, but at this point I'd take anything. So I'm strongly in favor, not because I think it's the best thing, but because I believe it's a step to get to the best thing.
Choir's left, which means it's time for the last question.
I have a stock market question. As a professional investment manager, I'm interested to know what your perception is of your industry in terms of the extent to which they pay attention to questions of the environment and energy when it comes to investing. And I cite, as an example of the point I'm trying to make, that investment managers, institutional managers in recent years have brought to bear some influence on corporate governance and executive compensation, and there have been changes. Maybe they're not dramatic enough, maybe they're not fast enough, but institutional investors have a lot of power. And corporate America can be a tremendous help in this area. So I'm just interested in your assessment of that question.
I have gone back and talked to a lot of my brethren on this topic, of course, in the last 5 months. And the truth of the matter is, I would say the overwhelming response has been, how does it affect the cash flows? Well, I think people look at it, they basically think, what is the chance of legislation? If legislation comes in, when will it come in? If it comes in, what will it mean in terms of what they do and what our costs of goods sold are, and what does that mean for the bottom line? And I'm not passing judgment on that, but that is the overwhelming response from institutional investors. And I think that that is not where the source of outrage is going to come from. And I think that they would argue that their job that they've been entrusted with is to do the best for their clients, and that they can't compromise that, and they genuinely believe that their fiduciary duty is that. And I'd say that's true of corporate America. Corporate America would say, our job is to make money for our shareholders and obey the law. And we will do both of those things scrupulously and genuinely, and asking them to take something else into consideration, I think, is not likely to be the thing that changes society.
Tom Steyer, we'll have you back. Thank you, brother.